Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Georgiana Uhlyarik. I am the Fredrik S. Eaton Curator of Canadian Art. And today I am joined by two of some of my favorite people at the Art Gallery of Ontario, Meaghan Monaghan and Sherry Phillips, both from our conservation department. I am speaking to you from Toronto, that has always been the territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga of the Credit. And this land is governed by very important and meaningful treaties that talk to us about the way in which we should care for the great lands around these Great Lakes. And treaty making and the principles of treaties are what govern the work that I endeavor to do here at the Art Gallery of Ontario in the Indigenous and Canadian Art Department. Today is a very special recording because both Meaghan and Sherry are actually at the Art Gallery of Ontario, unlike me, in the historic home that was the very first home of the gallery over 100 years ago. It was a building that was bequeathed so that an art museum could finally be a reality in the city of Toronto. The Boulton family built the Grange in 1817, and they also had beautiful gardens, and part of that continues to be a place that you can come and visit at the AGO. The Grange Park continues to be attached to the Art Gallery of Ontario. Sherry is in the library, which is a building that was built sometime in the late 19th century, where Meaghan is in the very hallway, the very entrance space of the Grange. And she's standing beside a portrait that we've had in the collection for over a decade, a lovely lady who was connected to the Boulton family. Meaghan, would you like to tell us a little bit about this painting?
Sure. So this is Anna Maria Beck Boulton, who would have been the sister-in-law of D'Arcy, who built the Grange. And so she's represented here what we think is probably a wedding portrait, but at the time when she's marrying George Boulton, it's her second marriage. So her first husband has passed away. She's also lost a child at this point. And so she may be wearing black because she's still in mourning. And she's also wearing the shawl, which we're going to talk about quite extensively today, and that Sherry has in the library right now. So Anna Maria probably would have been in this space, but she didn't live here in Toronto, but she definitely would have visited. And the renovation of this entryway was actually done in early 1840. And this portrait, which is painted by George Theodore Berthon, is also said to be painted around the same time. So there's a lot of connections that happen when we're in the Grange House with these objects. And so Berthon painted, we have 12 portraits by him in the AGO collection. And this is one of the smaller ones. We have some very large portraits, the three Robinson sisters, for example, which you may have seen in the galleries. It was in the McLean Center recently, so you see her on the slide. The one on the left is a wedding portrait of, I believe, D'Arcy's wife. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So she's wearing a white wedding dress, so that's interesting. There were white wedding dresses being worn at this time, but in this case, she's wearing a black dress. So Berthon was sort of a family painter, painted a lot of the members of the Boulton circle at the time. And the other interesting thing about this portrait is that we're not sure if it's possibly a rough draft, or maybe it was like a study that was thought to maybe be a bigger portrait at some point. It doesn't look completely finished in some areas. So the curtain in the back is missing some of its detail, but we're not sure. So we're still trying to learn the history of this painting. Another thing, so it is signed, which you won't be able to see very closely, but there is a signature here. There's also, so she's holding a fan and she also has a wedding ring on. So that helps us state, like, this is obviously when she was married. Sometimes the portrait was done after the marriage. And then actually, if you can go back one, the other interesting thing is that this painting is not lined, which means there hasn't been a second canvas attached to the back. So we can see the canvas maker's stamp. And this company, J. Bernard, was in London, and they were operating at 339 Oxford Street between a very certain time period. So it is likely that Berthon got this canvas and brought it from London, or it was shipped to him from London to Toronto. So that's a very interesting thing about this picture.
This is always the fascinating part about coming to the conservation lab, which is a great privilege that I have as a curator, and being able to speak with you about really the life of these objects and the kind of clues that they present. Sherry, though, is standing or sitting beside an extraordinary object, and I'm just going to stop sharing so that everyone can see Sherry in the Grange Library with this shawl, and this is the shawl that Anna Maria is wearing in the portrait. And the descendants of Anna Maria, when they donated this portrait to the EGO, they also donated the shawl.
And that's one of the things that immediately caught my attention when I was first processing this gift so many years ago, is how rare an opportunity it is to have a garment that belonged to and is featured in the portrait of the sitter. So this shawl is about almost 2.5 meters long. And what's extra, it's not big as far as shawls of this type would go from this time period, but I think that has to do with the fact that it's incredibly heavy. All of this embroidery on the surface is called a couching technique or a surface embroidery technique, whereas most of the shawls, we think that it's either Indian or British in origin. It's probably 1830s, perhaps, maybe a little bit later, maybe even earlier. I'm not entirely sure. We do know that Anna Maria's father was involved in and his friends were involved in the importation business. There was a lot of goods going back and forth on the oceanic trade routes. So it's entirely possible that this was made in India. There was also shawls like this being made in Persia, some in Kashmir, some in China. But the trade routes were very active, and people that had they were very prosperous were able to afford these items. The fact that it's featured in Anna Maria's portrait says to me that this was a treasured possession. It was likely one of the most expensive things that she owned. And shawls, whether it's a typical woven Kashmiri type shawl, or whether it's one that's been embroidered heavily like this one, they were incredibly expensive. They were like a piece of jewelry for the people that wore them. You can see in the detailed image on the slide, the sort of how detailed the flowers are. And all of this is surface embroidery. Can you go back a little bit, Georgiana, to show more? Yeah, there you see it. And even like I'm not sure what the flowers are, but perhaps it's a poppy, maybe it's a rose, but you can see the mesh that someone has done. All of this is done by hand. The textile itself is done in a twill weave. That means that it drapes in a certain way. It means it was a fairly robust piece of fabric, so in order to handle this heavy embroidery. The color is actually still quite fresh. We had a textile conservator, Claire Fried, who was in to help us install Studio 54, and I took a few minutes of her time to look at this in the vaults, and she remarked that it's in very good condition given its age and all the love and attention it probably received over the century. The color is fresh. There's a little bit of fading in the blue silk that you see embroidered in the center of the flowers, but when I look on the back, it's not appreciably faded. The black is still really good. The metal, the metallic threads are actually a silk core, and then the metal is wrapped around it. So I don't know if I don't think it's real gold. It's probably an alloy of some kind. Unfortunately, we haven't had the time to do the analysis on that. I think that the red fabric is probably silk. When I looked at it under magnification, it had that very classic, almost featureless, smooth fiber with a little bit of gloss that cultured silk often has. What else can I say about it? It's a little bit, there's some old damages. There's a few holes where it might have been caught on something. There's a few old repairs that aren't expertly done, but they're not doing any harm, so we won't reverse them at this point. What else can I say about it? Did you have any questions, Georgiana?
I did, but I muted myself. And I was trying to ask you questions and trying to understand why you're not listening to me, which may be just to describe the conservator-curator relationship. But no, my question was, you described that the shawl would fall a particular way. And I'm wondering if you have a sense of the weight of it because of all of the embroidery at I'm assuming it's at both ends. Is that correct? Yes. This beautiful embroidery. That I'm wondering about the
from one end to the other, and then the central portion is just nice and plain. But the pattern is definitely matched, and it's got these very classic kind of the butsa, these kind of, we would in Western we call them paisley, but originally it's an Indo-Persian kind of motif, the butsa, and it became known as paisley because of the town of Paisley, which is just outside of Glasgow, and it was a great weaving center, and so they were doing a lot of Indian and Kashmiri inspired garments, wraps, shawls, mantles. And so they adopted this pattern, and it has become known as paisley, but its origin it's much, much earlier than that. And it's a very traditional motif from many other cultures. So you can see that in the surface embroidery and the couching, and then there's these other flowers. It's very, the design that I see, like we really do have to talk with experts in these particular textiles. I was browsing around the wonderful Victoria and Albert website, and they have a number of shawls online that people can visit. And there's a few that are this kind of beautiful, intense red, either scarlet or crimson, with the same kind of gold or metal wrapped thread couching on it. So, and they all have the dates at about 1840, 1850-ish. So this one is right in line with that. I was reading that shawls became a very popular wedding gift. And this may have something to do with Napoleon. When he married his second wife, Mary Louise, in 1810, he apparently gave her like 17 Kashmiri shawls. So after that, it became a very popular, very trendy kind of wedding gift. So perhaps this was a wedding gift from George Strange Boulton to his wife, Anna Maria Walton Beck Boulton. We don't know. I don't have those records, and they didn't come from the family. A lot of it is speculation.
George Berthon's, I think, was his father, was at the court of Napoleon. So there might be all kinds of strange Napoleon connections. But Sherry, do you think does the embroidery add any weight to the shawl?
It does.
Okay.
And I think that's why when we see it, like because these would have been especially this one, it would have been a prized possession. Maybe this is another clue that the portrait is a study in preparation for something larger, because normally something this important to the sitter would be rendered in very precise detail. There are other European portraits beginning in the late 18th century where the sitter, a woman, is wearing her mantle or her shawl, and it's rendered in detail that's incredibly precise. And here you see the gold and you see the blue centers of the flowers, but other than that, it's very broadly done. It's not rendered with any kind of real precision. So, makes me wonder, maybe this was a study for something later. Who knows? I mean, we just don't know. It's just kind of fun to, go down, explore those avenues.
Indeed.
And the other thing that's great about this, the dress that she's wearing, it's very correct for the 1840s style, with the very large skirt, and then the bodice would have been quite stiff. I was reading that women could barely even bend over naturally because of this busk that they call, to keep them very, very upright and sort of tummy tuck maybe. She was born in 1799, so she was in her 40s definitely in this portrait. Still looking very lovely.
Yeah.
Everything she's wearing is very current. The style of the dress is very similar to the style of dress that Queen Victoria wore in her marriage in 1840. Queen Victoria, just as an aside, was the one that made white wedding dresses very fashionable because she chose to wear white. But the simplicity of the dress, the fact that her hair and her kind of the lace cap that she's wearing is very demure kind of presence that she's projecting in the portrait is all very much in line with the 1840s to 50s notion of what a woman should look like and what was appropriate for a woman at this time.
Mm. So I'm just going to ask one more question before we go, and I'm going to ask this question to Meaghan. Does the fact that we have this shawl in the collection, when you're thinking about work that you would need to do on the painting, how does the presence of the shawl in our collection inform or does not inform, or inspire or not inspire the work that you might or might not do on the painting itself?
I think there's definitely, like, they both inform each other in a lot of ways. So I think Sherry mentioned the blues are shown in the portrait. They're quite a bit brighter than on the textile now. So we know likely those blues have faded a bit. The other thing that informs it is we know this is such a prized possession and that there should be more detail. So again, is it a sketch? Sometimes is it possible it's been over cleaned and some of the details have now been lost through that process of restoration. I think it's just a really interesting dialogue between the two pieces sort of informing each other. And it's such an unusual case to have an object that's in the painting, represented in the painting in real life, to sort of have them together to speak to each other.
Well, I am so grateful for both of you for taking such good care of our collection always. Sherry, I know that you spend a lot of time in the contemporary art world, so it's lovely to see you spending quite a bit of time and really helping us really bring to life this portrait through all of the research and thinking that you've done on the shawl, and how lucky we are that we are able to spend time with such beautiful objects. I'm grateful to both of you.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.